Tonight, let us begin not with kings or cathedrals, not with battles or empires, but with something softer, quieter, and more enduring. Picture a worn wooden door creaking open to a modest cottage garden, tucked behind stone walls slick with moss. A thin mist clings to the air, curling lazily around crook hedges and low rows of earth. Here, in the damp stillness, forgotten lives once pushed themselves upward through the soil. Not people, plants. Vegetables, roots, and leaves that once fed an entire continent now lie nearly erased from memory. You may never have heard their names: Skirit, Salsify, good King Henry Rampion. Their seeds slept beneath muddy boots. Their leaves withered in pots simmering on smoky hearths. And yet, they were once essential, loved, tended, eaten, praised. Before potatoes came. Before refrigeration, chemical fertilizers, supermarkets, and glossy recipes on the internet. In that time, food grew humbly. You didn't pick from a shelf. You dug, pulled, plucked, and prayed. The garden wasn't a pastime, it was a lifeline. Imagine walking into that ancient patch of earth. The wind is low, a raven croaks from the edge of a crook fence, and the smell of wet soil rises around you. Your feet sink slightly into the mud. The air is cool, always cool. This is the Europe of the Middle Ages, 1,000 years before the modern produce aisle. It's spring, or almost. The last frost is past, but the sun still hides. The family. In the cottage behind you has barely scraped through the winter. Their stores of dried beans and roots are nearly gone. They're hungry. You can feel it in the thinness of the air, in the eagerness of the woman who stoops beside the row, her fingers searching the soil for life, and she finds it. Not gold, or treasure, or miracle, but skirit. A pale root, tangled like threads of string, sweet with a flavor of something between a parsnip and a chestnut. She lifts it like a gift, not large, not beautiful, but alive. Enough to mash, to boil with onions and garlic, to stretch into something filling. This scene would be unremarkable then, but now it feels sacred, because we've forgotten. These vegetables, once in every pot and garden, are now ghosts. They've been replaced by potatoes from the New World, by standardized crops that grow faster, store longer, look prettier. But in that replacement, something was lost. Not just a flavor, but a way of life, a closeness to the land, a reverence for the mundane. Tonight we will return to them, slowly, gently, as one returns to a memory or an old book whose pages still smell of smoke and ink. We'll touch each forgotten plant, feel its roots, learn its name, and we'll do so without rush. There's no need for hurry here. Let the world outside fade. Let your body grow still. Let the crackle of imagination guide your steps. Maybe, just maybe, as we sink into these stories, your breathing will soften. Your eyelids may droop. For there is something about these old things, simple, useful, silent, that speaks directly to the weary heart. Have you ever eaten something so old, it felt like you were remembering instead of tasting? That is what we're searching for now. And we begin beneath the soil. Not in royal gardens or bustling markets, but in the humblest plots where peasants once bent their backs and offered their hope to the earth. Skirit is our first guide, but others will follow. Each with its own texture, its own quiet story. You may not remember them, but they remember you. They are waiting. And in the hush of this moment, as night deepens and thought slows, we listen. Not for noise, but for root, for leaf, for seed. For the garden we lost, and the nourishment we forgot to miss, we listen for the stories held in silence. For beneath the surface of this soil lies not only food, but memory compressed into seeds, pressed into roots, passed hand to hand through generations that no longer speak their names. The story of forgotten vegetables is not just botanical. It is human. It is about what survives. Think now of a boy, small and barefoot, sent out in the dawn mist to gather greens for the morning meal. His mother hands him a basket woven from reeds and whispers the names of plants as though they are old friends. He walks the boundary of the field where the cultivated rows give way to wildness, to weeds, to the stubborn growth that thrives. Without permission, there he finds good King Henry. A name, yes, but more than that, a plant. Not noble in appearance, its broad leaves sagging with dew, but full of promise. This was the poor man's asparagus, the first green taste after a colorless winter. Its shoots boiled lightly, its leaves stirred into stew. It fed families when there was little else. It fed monks in stone monasteries where silence was kept and prayers were whispered over every meal. The boy pulls a few stalks and carries them home. Nothing grand, no feast, but a meal nonetheless, and warmth for another day. This boy will grow old. His hands will grow rough. He will teach his children the same names if he remembers them. But one day, perhaps 3 centuries later, those names begin to disappear. Gardens change, tastes change. We begin to want food that is sweeter, larger, uniform. We forget the crooked, the bitter, the slow-growing. What a quiet tragedy to forget something that once saved us. What does a plant feel, if it can feel, when it is no longer called by name? We are not just losing vegetables, we are losing vocabulary. A language of survival, of patience, of intimacy with the earth. Let us pause with that thought. Let it settle. Somewhere a root is still growing. Somewhere a seed of spirit lies, dormant in a drawer, wrapped in paper, waiting for a gardener curious enough to ask, "What is this?" And if that gardener plants it, waters it, watches it grow, something ancient stirs. A bridge forms between past and present, between a peasant and a poet, between a table long gone and the one you sit at now. That is the magic of these forgotten vegetables. They are not only sustenance, they are continuity. They root us to a world that was slower, quieter, more attentive, where you didn't choose your food by brand or label, but by season and soil and scent. This is not to romanticize hardship. Life in the medieval countryside was hard. Winters were long, bodies were worn, and hunger always lurked nearby. But even then, there was wonder in pulling a root from the frozen ground and knowing it would feed you, a kind of gratitude we no longer understand. And so, tonight, let us walk backward. Not in regret, but in reverence. With soft steps, as though we are guests in a dream. We will meet these vegetables as if for the first time. We will let their names roll gently off our tongues. Skirret, Good King, Henry Salsify, Rampion, Medlar, Parcel, Sea Kale, Lovage. Each one carries a whisper. Each one is a page torn from a cookbook written in mud and memory. We don't need to cook them now. We don't even need to taste them. We only need to listen. Let the rhythm of their stories steady your breath. Let the soil beneath your thoughts soften. Let your eyes close if they wish. You are in a garden. The past is alive again. The vegetables are speaking. So we linger just a little longer in this garden of memory. Not to rush forward, but to let the silence deepen. Think of your own hands now. Have they ever pulled something from the earth? Still cool and damp, a root still dusted in soil. Its shape imperfect but honest. Imagine the warmth of the sun barely rising, birds not yet awake, and in your grasp, something simple yet sacred. A vegetable no longer seen in markets, no longer taught in schools. But here it is, waiting for you. And with that root, with that moment, the past lives again. You haven't just found a plant. You've found a thread, and slowly, gently, we begin to follow it, deeper into the soil of history, into the realm of vegetables that once fed kings and commoners alike, and that now, perhaps, are ready to speak once more. Let us now bend low, over the dark, fragrant soil, and meet our first companion from the world beneath the garden. Skirret, a name that feels unfamiliar on the tongue. soft and sibilant, as though it belongs to a lullaby rather than a vegetable. And perhaps in a way, it does. For centuries ago, it was whispered through kitchen gardens and monastery kitchens, part of the daily rhythm of medieval life. Imagine a field behind a stone abbey, the walls cloaked in ivy, the wind moving gently through rows of herbs and root beds. The monks walk silently among them, their robes brushing the tops of leaves, their hands clasped behind their backs. In one such garden, the skirt thrives. It is not a proud plant. Its stalks are modest, its leaves unremarkable, but hidden. Beneath the surface is a cluster of white roots, thin as pencils, twisted like threads. Each one holds a taste sweet and nutty, like a marriage of parsnip and chestnut, delicate yet nourishing. To harvest it is to unearth something precious, not in value, but in memory. The monks dig carefully, lifting each root with reverence, as though unearthing relics. They wash them in wooden basins filled with cold well water. The roots gleam faintly in the morning light. Later, in the kitchen, they are peeled with small knives, the skins curling away to reveal pale flesh. The roots are boiled, mashed, or roasted in the hearth's embers. Sometimes garlic is added, or wild herbs from the hedgerow. The flavor is soft, deep, humble, but it fills the belly. And that, in a world ruled by hunger and season, is more than enough. Skirt did not demand much from the land. It was perennial, returning year after year without complaint. It tolerated frost, welcomed damp soil, and asked for little in return. That's why it grew everywhere, from the manicured plots of manor estates to the rough corners of peasant gardens. Children pulled it up in winter when no other crops remained. Widows boiled it with dried beans. Apothecaries praised it for easing digestion and calming the winds of the belly. Even Henry VIII's royal gardener is said to have planted skirt in the palace beds. But over time, it vanished. When the potato arrived from the New World, robust and calorie-rich, it swept across Europe like a quiet revolution. Skirt, with its thin, fussy roots and the effort required to clean them, faded into silence. It was no longer enough just to be good. Food now had to be efficient. And so, skirt became a shadow. Today, you might find it mentioned in dusty herbals, or in the notes of heirloom seed collectors. But in most gardens, it is gone. Still, if you close your eyes and listen, you might hear it in the crunch of dried leaves, in the hush of winter. Air in the memory of something faintly sweet and nearly lost. But skirt was not alone in this quiet labor. Along the edges of those same gardens, growing in the cracks between fence posts and cottage walls, another plant stood watch. Its name, charming and strange, Good King Henry, not a royal herb, not a crowned flower, but a low, leafy green that fed the poor when little else would. Its name may have come from a folk figure, a protector of the land, or perhaps from the old Germanic for home ruler. Either way, it was well loved. Peasants called it the poor man's asparagus. You would not find it in banquet halls or feast day menus, but you would find it beside the hearth, in bubbling pots of lentil stew, or wrapped in oatcakes to carry into the fields. The plant itself was tough, persistent. Its roots held fast in the soil. Its leaves, triangular and thick, turned dark green in summer and bore the weight of morning frost without complaint. In spring, its young shoots emerged like little spears, tender and full of life. These were the prize. Boiled lightly, they offered one of the first fresh bites after winter. Slightly bitter, like the memory of cold still lingering in the air, but nourishing beyond measure. Later, the larger leaves would be picked and stewed like spinach, though coarser in texture and stronger in flavor. And like skirt, Good King, Henry was useful beyond the kitchen. Herbalists ground its seeds, dried its roots, burned its ash to make lye for soap. It was a full companion food, medicine, cleanser. A plant that asked for almost nothing but gave so much. Its value lay not in delicacy, but in resilience. You could plant it once and forget it. It would return each spring, pushing through gravel, thriving where little else dared. It grew near stables, in poor soil, beside stone walls where the sun touched only briefly. It was a friend to the weary, the busy, the overworked. And so year after year, it fed those who had no time for finicky vegetables. But it too fell out of favor. As asparagus became easier to cultivate, as spinach was refined into tender supermarket bundles, good King Henry's coarseness seemed outdated. Its name was forgotten. Its seed stopped being saved. Yet somewhere in the hills of Wales or in forgotten corners of the Alps, it still grows wild. And if you pass it on a walk, not knowing its name, it won't mind. It will keep growing quietly, as it always has. These two plants, Skirret and good King Henry, remind us that survival is not always loud. Sometimes it curls underground, pale and persistent. Sometimes it leans against the cottage wall, waiting for a hand to reach. They were not glamorous, not exotic, but they were loved, they were known, and they carried the seasons forward, one quiet harvest at a time. So when we speak of forgotten vegetables, we are not just reviving curiosities from old cookbooks. We are reawakening companions. We are walking once more beside the monks and mothers, the field hands and children, who once bent over these plants and whispered thanks. And in that whisper, perhaps they left behind a blessing, a sweetness that still lingers in the soil, waiting patiently to be tasted again. And yet, there's something almost poetic about their disappearance. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a slow fading, like footprints in tilled earth after a gentle rain. No one declared that Skirret was no longer welcome, or that good King Henry had overstayed its usefulness. Instead, they were simply not planted. Their seeds were not saved. Recipes changed, diets shifted, and slowly these plants receded into the background of memory until even their names sounded foreign, like echoes of another language. But plants are patient. Unlike humans, they don't mourn. They don't demand to be remembered. They wait. Quietly, stubbornly, seed by seed. Somewhere in a corner of a heritage garden or in the drawer of a seed historian's collection, a few of those Skirret seeds remain. Somewhere along a windswept footpath, a good King Henry plant still thrusts its shoots up through gravel, indifferent to whether it's seen. Perhaps the true magic of these vegetables lies not just in their flavor or their function, but in their humility. They were not made for show, not bred for beauty. They existed to nourish, to return year after year, to serve without recognition. And in that, they reflect something we often forget to value: a quiet constancy. The ability to persist without applause. The resilience to thrive in poor soil, in neglected corners, in hard years. In remembering them, we remember that survival does not always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from gentleness, from a sweetness rooted in patience, from leaves that grow where no one is looking, and roots that twist through cold ground, holding fast. And so, as we continue this journey through the forgotten garden, we do so not as explorers uncovering exotic wonders, but as grandchildren returning to an old family story. We walk slowly, respectfully, as though approaching something sacred. And with each step, each plant, we peel back a little more of what time has buried. Skirret and good King Henry are the beginning, not because they are more important than what follows, but because they remind us how to see. Not just to look, but to notice, to bend low, to touch the earth, to recognize that nourishment often arrives quietly, and that perhaps the things we have lost are not gone, only waiting for us to remember them. The child beside her, perhaps no older than 7, leans closer and asks a question, not about kings or saints or battles, but something far more sacred in that moment. Why do you grow these, Grandma, when no one else does? And she smiles, not surprised, as though waiting years for the question to come. Her answer is simple, but it carries generations, because they remember us, even if we forget them. The wind shifts. A bird calls from the hedgerow. Somewhere far beyond the cottage, the world hurries on. But here, in the stillness, a seed of memory is planted. The kind that doesn't bloom in days or weeks, but in seasons of the soul. And perhaps, years from now, the child will grow up and plant something different, something old, something nearly forgotten. And in doing so, they will remember this moment, not with words, but with scent, with touch, with taste. That is how the old garden returns, not all at once, but root by root, leaf by leaf, story by story. In the gentle hush of history, we find not only kings and scholars, but quiet vegetables, clinging to edges of fields and coastlines, living out their brief, fragrant lives under the gaze of moonlight and salt spray wind. Tonight, we walk with two such plants, salsify and sea kale names, that barely stir modern recognition, yet once rooted deeply in the rhythms of European kitchens. Close your eyes and imagine a cool morning by the edge of a meadow, dew still resting on tall grasses, and tucked into a patch of soil made light by centuries of leaf fall and forgotten ash. The first leaves of the salsify begin to push through. Salsify, sometimes called the oyster plant for its faintly marine taste when cooked, is not an extravagant vegetable. Its beauty lies in understatement. Long, thin roots, pale and twisted, coated in rough brown skin that hides creamy flesh within. Its flowers, if left to bloom, burst into purple fireworks that look not unlike a wild dandelion in celebration. But few ever saw them, because salsify was meant to be harvested young, its energy stored in the root, not the bloom. In kitchens, centuries ago, especially across France and parts of England, it was prized as a winter food. When cabbages had rotted and potatoes had not yet become commonplace, salsify stood firm. Dug from frost-hardened ground with fingers stiff from cold, it was peeled slowly by the hearth, sliced into coins, and simmered in milk or wine. Its texture was soft, yielding, its taste gentle and warm. It fed children, the elderly, the tired. It was not a food of feasts, but of continuity, of endurance. In monasteries it was grown in neat rows, tended by novices and aged friars alike. In cottage gardens, it pushed through poor soil without complaint. In coastal towns, it thrived in sandy beds warmed by sunlight and salted by wind. It was said that those who ate salsify in winter dreamed more vividly, their bodies warmed not only by food but by memory. The plant itself is patient, growing slowly, storing its sweetness underground, waiting through the long days of frost. It teaches us that nourishment does not always arrive in haste. Sometimes it ripens in silence. But salsify was also delicate. Its roots broke easily. It required care to dig and more care to store. As industrial agriculture rose and transportation lengthened the food chain, plants like salsify with their brittle roots and short shelf lives were quietly left behind. Supermarkets favored uniformity, durability. And so salsify, like so many others, was brushed aside by efficiency. But let us not forget that salsify's value was never in how well it shipped, but in how deeply it comforted. A stew with salsify was a lullaby for the stomach, a soft song for cold nights. Now let us leave the inland fields and walk toward the sound of gulls and surf. The air grows sharp, tasting of minerals and salt. Here we meet our next forgotten friend, sea kale. A plant of rocky shores and wind-lashed cliffs, it does not grow where life is easy. It thrives where waves crash and soil is scarce, where roots must cling to gravel and stone. In spring, its shoots rise pale and blushing, like candle flames in morning light. These tender stalks, prized once like asparagus, were gathered in secret by coastal families who guarded their patches fiercely. For sea kale was not merely food, it was inheritance. Some families passed down rights to certain patches of coastal ground, measuring their boundaries by stones or ancient paths. A child might grow up watching a parent harvest the shoots, learning the tides, the soil, the angle of the sun. In early spring, the shoots were boiled and served with butter, their taste slightly nutty, ocean-kissed. Later in the season, the broad blue-green leaves could be cooked like cabbage, though they're briny. Undertone remained. The flowers came in waves, small, white, and fragrant, drawing bees from inland and seabirds alike. The plant gave and gave, and when it died back in autumn, it returned to the stones without fuss, its memory lingering in the soil and in the bones of those it fed. Sea kale was known to ancient Greeks and Romans, though it was the English who embraced it most in the 18th and 19th centuries. Some coastal manors even built forcing pots, large clay domes, to blanch the shoots in early spring, creating a prized delicacy for the table. But as railways stretched inland and foreign foods arrived with them, the humble shoots of sea kale lost their prestige. Imports of true asparagus from warmer climates pushed aside this coastal cousin. Supermarkets did not want it. It did not fit in plastic bags or travel well in crates. And so, once again, a vegetable quietly vanished from daily life. Not gone, but hiding, still clinging to forgotten coasts, still sending up shoots each spring where cliffs meet the sea. These plants, salsify and sea kale, offer us more than forgotten flavors. They offer lessons in resilience and grace. One grew quietly in inland gardens, the other battled wind and salt by the shore. Both survived in difficult soil, nourished generations, and then receded without bitterness. Their stories are not just botanical, they are human. For in their rhythms we see echoes of ourselves, of lives shaped by season, soil, and quiet endurance. Imagine now an old woman walking barefoot along a pebbled shore, her skirt damp with spray, a woven basket in one arm. She leans low to gather sea kale, speaking softly to no one in particular. Not a prayer, not a spell, just words of thanks. She has walked this shore for 50 springs, always knowing when the shoots will rise. She does not own the plant, but she belongs to it. In another place, an elderly man kneels in a narrow garden bed behind a cottage, brushing soil from a cluster of salsify roots. He winces as one snaps, but smiles anyway. He remembers his mother peeling them beside the fire. He plants them not because they are easy, but because they are right, because they remind him who he is. These are not romantic fantasies. They are memories still held by a few. And if we choose to, we can let them root again. We can let salsify stretch its flowers once more toward the sun. Let sea kale whisper again beneath the gulls and breeze. We do not need grand gardens or titles, just time, just attention, just the willingness to bend low, to listen, to remember. These forgotten vegetables do not ask for praise. They only ask to be planted, to be seen, to be tasted again. And in that simple act of growing what once was, we remember not only them, but ourselves. And now, imagine a table worn, wooden, its surface etched with time and use, set for a quiet evening meal. A candle flickers in the center, its light trembling like breath. On a ceramic plate lies a humble stew, slices of salsify, soft and pale, floating beside grains and herbs. A few sea kale leaves rest on the side, their bluish-green color dulled by steaming. There is no fanfare, no garnish. Yet the scent rising from the bowl is rich with memory of gardens long gone, of hands that once peeled and stirred, of voices that spoke not of trends or diets, but of weather, harvest, and hunger. Perhaps an elder sits at this table alone, or with a grandchild who doesn't yet know the names of these things. But the act of eating, slow, mindful, grateful, is a ritual older than language. It says, we are here, we have endured. We remember. Salsify and sea kale may not fill books or museum halls, but they filled bellies. They shaped seasons. They wove themselves into the daily fabric of survival. To revive them is not an act of novelty, but of connection. In planting them, we reach back across centuries. In tasting them, we restore forgotten songs of the earth. The flavors are not loud. They do not announce themselves like chili or citrus. Instead, they unfold slowly, warming the mouth with hints of sea and root, of silence and sun. They linger as memories do, long after the plate is cleared. So let us carry them forward, not as relics, but as companions. Let us plant their seeds, in soil and in story. Let us teach their names to children, not as trivia, but as inheritance. And let us return, whenever we can, to the places where they still grow wild, and sit for a while in the wind. Listen, breathe, and remember, even the quietest plants leave deep roots. Somewhere, perhaps not far from your own home, a single seed of salsify lies dormant in a forgotten bed, or a cluster of sea kale clings to the edges of a crumbling stone wall by the coast. They do not cry out for attention. They do not mind being overlooked. But if you were to kneel beside them, to trace the shape of their leaves or gently press your fingers into the earth around their roots, you might feel something stir, not just the plant, but the memory it carries, the centuries of quiet service, the hands that once cherished them, the stories still waiting to be retold. And maybe, without a word, you'd understand that these are not lost foods. They are sleeping companions. All they need is for someone to come close, to notice, to begin again. And in doing so, the forgotten garden breathes once more in the long shadow of old stone walls, where soil is thin but rich with memory. Two humble plants once grew with quiet purpose, chard and purslane. Their names may not evoke awe today, yet centuries ago, they were essential to the rhythm of life. They were not exotic nor rare, they were constant. And in their constancy, they offered nourishment not just for the body, but for the soul. Let us begin with chard, sometimes called silver beet, sometimes leaf beet, but always recognizable by its wide, wrinkled leaves and the brilliant color of its stems, white, yellow, pink, red like stained glass in a garden. Chard is a cousin of the beetroot, yet unlike its earthy sibling, it is grown for its leaves and stalks. It grows quickly, yields generously, and thrives in poor soil, often pushing through when other crops hesitate. It is a plant of resilience and of quiet beauty. Picture a hillside garden outside a medieval village. The houses nearby are humble wattle and daub with thatched roofs, but the garden glows with green. Chard grows in thick rows, its colors vivid even beneath a gray sky. A woman kneels, gathering leaves into her apron, her fingers cold, her back aching. She does not harvest because it is rare or prestigious. She harvests because it is dependable. She knows how to cook it 5 different ways: stewed with garlic, folded into barley porridge, layered in flatbread, served alongside poached eggs, or added to a meaty broth to stretch the flavor through the week. It is not just food. It is versatility. It is survival. In the Alps, in the Pyrenees, in the stony hills of Sicily, chard appears again and again in folk recipes, in whispered advice passed from grandmother to daughter. Boil it once, then. Fry it, or never pick the leaves too young. Let them work a little first. Such instructions are not written, they are lived. Chard is a garden's answer to poverty. It is what fed families during seasons of hardship, and what gave mothers one more option when there seemed to be none. And yet, it is delicious not in the manner of rare spices or expensive oils, but in the way a warm blanket is delicious on a cold night. It comforts. It satisfies. But chard, for all its usefulness, is not dramatic. And so, over time, it faded from attention. As spinach took over the supermarket aisles, and kale climbed the ladders of food fashion, chard quietly stayed behind, grown by fewer hands, seen in fewer kitchens. Its stems, once prized, were now dismissed as stringy. Its taste gentle and earthy was labeled bland. But still, in some corners of the world, it grows, in monastery gardens, in backyards of older women who refuse to stop planting it, in forgotten allotments where its seeds, scattered by the wind, find cracks to settle in. Chard asks for little, but gives much. And in that giving, it reminds us that sometimes the best nourishment comes not from novelty, but from knowing. Now, we turn to purslane, a plant even humbler than chard and often mistaken for a weed. Its leaves are small, thick, succulent, fleshy in the way of desert plants, holding water like a promise. It sprawls across the ground, low and unassuming, with tiny yellow flowers that open only when the sun is high. To many modern gardeners, it is a nuisance. But to older traditions, it was a treasure. In ancient Greece, purslane was considered both food and medicine. Its leaves, high in omega-3 south and refreshing with a lemony crunch, were eaten raw in salads, cooked in soups, or pickled for leaner months. Roman soldiers carried it dried in their packs, chewing it for strength. In North Africa and the Middle East, it still appears in summer dishes, folded into yogurt or flattened into breads. And in parts of rural France and Spain, it grows along stone paths, quietly offering itself to those who remember. Purslane is not cultivated in neat rows. It grows wherever it wishes, between cobbles, at the edge of a step, in the corners of forgotten fields. It is a plant of the margins, both literally and socially. But it thrives. It flourishes where other crops fail, requires no irrigation, no fertilization, and almost no effort. It is the rebel of the edible world, wild, free, and deeply nourishing. Imagine a child, maybe 5 or 6, crouching by a dusty road, plucking leaves of purslane to bring home. Their mother washes it in a wooden bowl and adds it to a stew with leftover lentils and a few pieces of salted fish. The meal is modest but brightened by that tart green flavor. It lifts the whole pot. Later, the same child grows older and forgets. The plant vanishes from their plate, replaced by rice, pasta, things wrapped in plastic. But one summer afternoon, walking past an old stone wall, they spot the unmistakable leaves of purslane again. And for a moment, memory blooms. Not in words, but in scent, in texture, in the way sunlight catches on those smooth, jade-like leaves. Purslane reminds us that what we overlook may be what sustains us. Its value does not depend on its image. It has no need for marketing, for packaging, for celebrity chefs. It simply exists, humble, abundant, nourishing. And in that existence, it holds a quiet power. Both chard and purslane invite us to think differently about abundance. They do not demand ideal conditions. They do not perform for praise. They grow in silence, in poor soil, in overlooked places, and yet they endure. They feed, they remain. In them, we see echoes of our own survival, of meals made with little, of gardens scratched into hard ground, of hands that found a way even when there seemed to be none. Picture now a patch of earth behind a forgotten cottage. The roof has fallen in, but the garden still breathes. Among weeds and wild grass, a patch of chard grows tall, its stems red and gold in the setting sun. Nearby, purslane spreads like a soft green net, catching the last light of day. No one planted them this year, but they return. Carried by wind, by birds, by memory, they are not gone. They are waiting. Waiting for someone to kneel, to notice, to gather. And in that gathering, to remember not just what we eat, but how we once lived with resilience, with gratitude, with deep and quiet care. Now imagine a modest kitchen, its windows fogged with steam, where a pot simmers slowly over a wood-burning stove. Inside, chopped chard stems turn tender in a broth colored, golden with turmeric and seasoned only with salt and patience. The leaves are added last, their color deepening as they wilt, folding like silk into the warm liquid. There is no meat tonight, but no one minds. The smell alone fills the room with comfort. In the corner, an elderly man sits peeling purslane, leaves from their soft red stems, humming to himself. He remembers how his mother used to call it poor man's salad, and how he used to sneak bites when she wasn't looking. He doesn't call it a weed. He calls it dinner. For centuries, meals like this sustained entire communities. No formal recipes, no measurements, just rhythm. What was in season, what was left in the garden, what could be gathered before dark. These foods didn't just feed, they connected. They brought people to the same table. They asked little but gave plenty. Today, we live in a time when food travels thousands of miles, packaged in layers of plastic, its origins unclear. But chard and purslane whisper a different story, one of closeness, of place, of gratitude. They remind us that sustenance once grew just outside our door. That flavor once depended not on rarity, but on readiness. That freshness meant not best before, but picked today. There is something profoundly grounding about returning to these foods. Growing them, harvesting them, preparing them by hand. Not because they are fashionable, but because they matter. Because they remind us that even in the simplest acts, pulling weeds, stirring broth, tearing leaves, we participate in something ancient and human. We belong to the earth, and it in turn feeds us. Somewhere, perhaps in the cracks of a city, sidewalk, or the forgotten edge of a village plot, chard and purslane still find room to grow. No one may water them. No one may notice. And yet they return, year after year, stubborn and generous. A child might pass by, tug a leaf without knowing its name. A neighbor might scowl and call it a weed. But the earth remembers. The seeds remember. And those who once relied on them, those whose bones were built from their minerals, whose dreams were nourished by their warmth, might smile in the silence. If you were to plant them now, in your own garden, they would not ask for much. Just a bit of soil, a bit of time. And in return, they would give you more than leaves and stems. They would give you continuity, a thread to the past, a promise that the forgotten need not stay forgotten, that even the smallest, humblest plants hold the power to restore something essential, not only in the soil, but in ourselves. So let them grow, let them spread, let them feed. And in feeding, let them teach us again what it means to belong to a place, to a season, to a deeper, older way of being. Now picture an old journal, its pages browned with time, its ink faded, but still legible. On one page, a recipe scribbled in the margin: chard leaves with onion, salt, and vinegar. Let rest before eating. On another, a note: purslane good for the heat of summer. Keeps well pickled. These were not gourmet instructions. They were life, passed down in smudged handwriting and memory. In reading them, we find not just instructions, but inheritance. Not just meals, but meaning. And perhaps that is the greatest gift these plants offer, not their flavor or their resilience, but their reminder that food at its heart is story. And every story worth telling begins in the dirt, with something small, something green, and someone willing to care. In the shaded corners of ancient gardens, where herbs and flowers mingled with vegetables in fragrant disarray, too remarkable. Plants once held a quiet but vital role: nigella and skirret. They were not the backbone of feasts, nor the mainstays of markets, but they whispered their way into memory through scent and sweetness. Let us begin with nigella, often called black cumin, or love in a mist. Imagine a delicate flower, its petals a soft, dusky blue, floating above a crown of feathery green foliage. At its center, a dark pod swells with seeds, tiny, black, crescent-shaped specks that carry the smell of toasted earth, onion, oregano, and pepper, all folded into one. These seeds, though small, traveled far. They were found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, mentioned in medieval herbals, and stirred into breads from India to the Levant. Yet somewhere between apothecaries and spice cupboards, nigella found its way to the cottage gardens of England and France. There it was grown not just for flavor but for beauty, its flowers blooming like sky-colored sighs in the midst of kitchen greens. The seeds were gathered when the pods turned brittle and dry, shaken gently into cloth bags and tucked away for winter. A pinch would be added to bread dough, scattered over roasted vegetables, or infused into medicinal tonics said to warm the chest and stir digestion. Old wives would crush them with mortar and pestle, humming softly as the scent filled the room, treating colds, comforting children, blessing meals. Nigella had a place not just in the body, but in ritual. In certain villages, it was sown alongside cabbages to protect them from pests, or scattered at thresholds to ward off ill spirits. Its presence was soft but steadfast, like an old cat watching from a windowsill. It did not shout. It remained. But with the rise of commercial spice blends and the simplification of kitchen staples, Nigella fell out of favor in the West. It lingered in Middle Eastern and South Asian cuisines, where it was never forgotten, but in many European gardens. It faded into decoration, just a flower, they said, no longer seen as food, no longer pressed into dough by firelight hands. And yet, the seeds remain potent. Their aroma is unmistakable, their legacy embedded in ancient recipes and whispered lore. If planted again, they bloom as they always have, fragile and determined. Now let us kneel by the water's edge, where soil remains cool and damp. Here grows skirit, a plant few today could name, but one that once graced banquet halls and peasant stews alike. A member of the carrot family, skirit does not produce one large root, but many slender ones, like pale fingers reaching into the earth. Their texture is smooth, their taste sweet, some say like parsnips laced with sugar. Others say like carrots infused with spice. In Old English texts, it was called a white root, cultivated with care in the gardens of monasteries and manor houses during the Tudor period and before. The preparation was simple but tender. The roots were dug in autumn, washed free of mud, and slowly roasted or boiled. Some cooks battered and fried them, others stewed them with wine and herbs. They were a delicacy when meat was scarce, a luxury in seasons of fasting. Monks considered them easy on the stomach and gentle on the spirit. Skirit held a sweetness that comforted without cloying, a food of moderation and warmth. In the kitchen, it brought joy. In the garden, it asked little but patience. It preferred wet soil, shaded corners, the places other crops might refuse. But skirit thrived in those margins. Its slender roots grew tangled and shy, not showy, not proud. Harvesting them was an act of care. A quick tug would snap them. Instead, gardeners knelt low, loosened the soil, cupped each root gently in hand. It was not a crop for haste. It taught slowness. It taught respect. Picture now a cook in a stone kitchen, a fire crackling behind her, peeling skirit roots by candlelight. Her hands move without hurry. The air smells of thyme, garlic, wood smoke. In a pot, skirit simmers with barley and bits of onion, a humble supper for a cold night. The cook hums a tune her grandmother taught her. She does not call it history. She calls it dinner. And then imagine another scene: a boy in a cloister garden, barefoot in the morning dew, pulling weeds from around a skirit plant. He does not grumble. The friar told him skirit was St. Bridget's favorite root, a symbol of sweetness and virtue. The boy touches the leaves with reverence, as if greeting an elder. That boy will grow up and forget many things, but he will remember the feel of skirit leaves in his palm. He will remember the taste. So why did skirit disappear? Not because it failed us, but because it did not suit speed. Its roots are too delicate for machines, too variable for mass production. They do not stack neatly in crates or gleam under supermarket lights. And so one day, they were not grown, not asked for, not known. But they are not lost. Skirit still grows, quietly, in the gardens of seed savers, of historians, of dreamers. And like Nigella, it waits for someone to notice, to kneel, to taste. Now return with me to a small garden behind a stone cottage. The roof is mossy. The door creaks. But the garden breathes. In one corner, blue Nigella flowers nod in the breeze, their seed pods rattling softly. In another, skirt leaves spread low, their roots hidden beneath the loam. A woman in worn boots kneels in the dirt, her hands smudged, her face lined with time. She does not garden for beauty or profit. She gardens because she remembers, or because she wants to. She breaks a skirt root in half, inhales its sweetness. She gathers nigella seeds in her apron. Later that evening, in her tiny kitchen, she bakes a flatbread. The dough is coarse, made with spelt. Into it, she folds a handful of nigella. In a skillet, she roasts a skirt, caramelized until golden. She eats alone, but not lonely. The flavors keep her company. And beyond her window, in the wind, the plants whisper their thanks. In every forgotten plant lies a fragment of ourselves. A taste, a memory, a way of being close to the land. Nigella and skirt do not demand our attention. They will not go viral nor dominate menus, but they endure. And in doing so, they invite us to return, to slower meals, to sacred gardens, to the kind of nourishment that lingers long after the last bite. Somewhere, someone will plant them again. Perhaps it will be you. And when you do, the past will rise gently through the soil, blooming into something tender and true. Elsewhere, in a different time, a traveler stopped at a wayside. Inn nestled beneath a hill. The air was sharp with winter, the fire crackling low, and the meal set before him was simple bread with nigella, and a stew made with skirt roots, soft and golden in a broth of leeks and lentils. He asked the innkeeper what it was. She shrugged and smiled. Old food, she said. From before things got rushed. He didn't forget the flavor. Years later, he would plant a few seeds in a quiet patch of soil behind his home, hoping they might remember, and they did. Even now, centuries later, such stories cling to these plants like dew to leaves. They are not grand stories, but human. Ones, meals shared in silence, gardens tended in sorrow. Healing passed hand to hand, without fanfare. These plants were not background, they were the thread. Not the feast, but the fabric. And today, as we seek to remember what matters, sustainability, slowness, connection, nigella and skirt return with their gifts. They offer not only nourishment, but rhythm. Not just taste, but time. In their soft strength, we are reminded that what is small may still be sacred. What is quiet may yet endure. In an age when food is often anonymous, sealed in plastic, shipped across oceans, consumed without thought, there's a quiet rebellion in remembering plants like these. To grow nigella and skirt today is to choose intimacy over industry, memory over marketing. You won't find their names on fast food menus or convenience shelves, but in the soft soil of your own garden, in a pot by the window, in a borrowed patch behind an apartment block, they will thrive. They are not relics, they are roots. And roots, once reawakened, are hard to forget. So plant them not just for taste, but for story, for the way they make you pause, for the way they remind you that to eat slowly, to harvest by hand, to season with patience is a kind of prayer. And in that prayer, something lost returns. In the quiet folds of time, where fields once rolled golden beneath soft skies and kitchens glowed with firelight rather than electric bulbs, two steadfast companions, nourished generation after generation, barley and parsnip. These were not noble foods served at royal banquets, nor rare spices hoarded in jeweled boxes. They were the daily bread and the hearth's warmth, the food of monks, farmers, widows, and children with wind-chapped cheeks. Let us begin with barley, one of the oldest cultivated grains in the world. Before rice fed empires and before wheat ruled the Western diet, barley swayed in the fields of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the highlands of Scotland. Its resilience was legendary. It could grow where others could not, on thin soil, in cold climates, with little water. It became the grain of endurance, of patience. Its stalks bent with the wind and rose again. In medieval Europe, barley was the pulse of the countryside. Wheat was for the wealthy, oats for animals, rye for the hungry, but barley fed everyone. It was ground into flour for dark, dense bread. It was boiled into thick porridge that steamed in wooden bowls. It was fermented into ale that quenched thirst and quieted grief. In monasteries, barley was soaked, simmered, strained. In cottages, it was stretched with dried herbs, cabbage leaves, or whatever the land could spare. Even in lean years there was barley. It filled bellies with its mild, nutty comfort. Picture a village in the late 14th century, the roofs thatched with straw, the air rich with peat smoke. A pot hangs over the hearth. Inside it, barley dances with leeks, garlic, and a few shreds of salted pork. A child stirs it carefully with a wooden spoon. It is nearly supper time, and the scent has called the family in from the fields. There will be no dessert, no garnish, no tablecloth. But the barley is warm. It is enough. Later, when night wraps the village in frost, that warmth lingers in their bellies like a quiet blessing. Barley was not glamorous, but it was dependable. It taught people to be frugal, to be inventive. It gave them a reason to gather, to wait, to share. It taught the wisdom of slow cooking and the joy of full bowls. But barley was more than a food, it was medicine too. Healers boiled it with milk and honey for the ill. Mothers mashed it for teething infants. Priests blessed it during times of plague. Barley never demanded attention. It simply offered itself. Over and over, like a humble friend who stayed through famine and feast alike. As time passed, barley was pushed aside for finer grains. But even now, its soft hum lingers in the quiet corners of tradition Scotch broth, barley tea, the crusty loaves of rural bakers who still knead memory into dough. If you listen carefully, barley still speaks. It tells of survival, of care, of meals made with nothing but still meaning everything. And then there is the parsnip pale, crooked and overlooked. To the untrained eye, it might seem like a carrot that forgot its color. But to those who have tasted it in the depth of winter, roasted to gold, melting on the tongue, parsnip is a revelation. It is a root of sweetness and light in the darkest months. Native to Europe and beloved long before potatoes arrived from across the sea, parsnips were once the staple of winter feasts and fast-day meals alike. They were pulled from frozen soil with stiff fingers, scrubbed with snow, and laid upon kitchen tables like treasure. Their flavor, deepened by frost, was sugary without being cloying, earthy without being bitter. In fasting seasons, Lent, Advent, and the long Fridays when meat was forbidden, parsnips stepped forward. Baked, boiled, mashed, or fried in goose fat, they brought joy to plain meals. Some cooks simmered them in milk, others glazed them with honey, still others folded them into pies with nuts and herbs. In lean years they were sliced thin and dried for later. In years of plenty, they were eaten fresh with butter and salt. They were food for saints and for shepherds alike. Imagine a woman standing at a wooden counter in a damp stone kitchen. Her apron is smeared with flour, and her hair is pinned back hastily. Outside, the trees are bare. Inside, parsnips roast slowly in a clay dish, their edges crisping, their sweetness blooming in the heat. She hums a tune from her childhood, something slow, something circular. Her daughter sets the table, wooden plates, pewter spoons, a pitcher of water. There is no meat today, but no one complains. The parsnips are enough. Their scent fills the house like a hymn. But more than their taste, it is their presence that mattered. Parsnips could be trusted. They waited underground all winter long, storing flavor, holding energy. When other crops failed, parsnips remained. When times were hard, they softened. They are a root that gives without pride. They taught those who ate them to be grateful for what grew close to home, to find sweetness not in sugar, but in soil. And yet, like many humble foods, parsnips were later displaced. The rise of the potato, cheap and productive, pushed them. Aside, imports from warmer lands dazzled palates with citrus and spice. Supermarkets forgot the lumpy, pale roots that had once been so beloved, but some still remember. In allotments and cottage gardens, parsnips still grow tangled, tenacious, tasting of the past. They do not ask to be remembered. They simply return each year when the ground allows, waiting to be noticed. Together, barley and parsnip form a pair as old as European cookery itself. They are winter's guardians, the foods of patience and endurance. They teach that a meal does not need extravagance to be sacred, that sometimes a warm bowl and a quiet evening are the very definition of feast. Picture now a table in a quiet farmhouse. Snow presses against the windows. Inside, candles flicker. In one bowl, barley stew, thick and rich. In another, roasted parsnips, golden and soft. A family sits close, their hands wrapped around warm cups. No one speaks for a while. There is no need. The food speaks for them. In each spoonful, memory. In each bite, gratitude. Outside, the land sleeps. Inside, life is held gently in the flavors that came from soil and care. Barley and parsnip are not exotic. They are not glamorous, but they are holy in their way. They remind us that sustenance is not measured in spice or rarity, but in what brings us back to ourselves. They are not relics, they are roots. And roots, once known, are never truly forgotten. Some say the flavor of barley is the taste of waiting. It does not overwhelm, does not shout, but builds gently, like a memory warming with time. And parsnip? Parsnip is the taste of hope buried deep, surviving the freeze, and emerging sweeter for the hardship. Together, they form the rhythm of winter kitchens for centuries. In times when meals were measured by what could be stored, what could be coaxed from the frost-bitten soil, they gave more than nourishment. They gave continuity. They were the assurance that the land still cared, that even in its silence, it remembered how to provide. You can still grow them, you know. The seeds are cheap. The soil doesn't need to be rich, just willing. The process is slow, but that's the point. These are not fast foods. They are slow companions. They ask you to bend, to kneel, to tend. They do not reward impatience. But for those who wait, who return, who remember, they offer a kind of healing nothing packaged ever could. And when the barley sprouts, when the parsnip greens push through the thawing ground, you might feel it too. A soft return, a whisper of all that still lives below. Picture now a future not too far ahead. A small community garden tucked between apartment blocks where someone, an elder perhaps, or a young child with dirt under their nails, has planted barley along one edge and parsnips down the center row. The barley sways in the breeze, whispering secrets to the sky. The parsnips rest below, patient and unseen. In this quiet corner, something old is being remembered, not through textbooks or documentaries, but through touch, through tending, through taste. The harvest will not be large, it will not feed a city, but it will feed a story. And the ones who eat from that garden will carry the story with them, in their breath, in their bones. For in every grain, in every root, lives a memory too ancient to vanish, too tender to forget. And as long as barley and parsnip are planted, somewhere by someone, the thread of that memory will hold. And perhaps one day, someone will prepare a meal with those harvests, not out of nostalgia, but out of joy. A pot of barley soup simmering gently, sweetened with roasted parsnips and seasoned with thyme. They will share it with friends or eat it alone and feel something stir, a sense of belonging not to history, but to continuity. A quiet promise that as long as we remember how to grow and share, we will never truly be lost. That is the gift of barley and parsnip, not merely sustenance, but the reminder that what we tends to us in return. In the colder corners of the past, where winters lingered long and cellars ran low, two humble vegetables often stood between. A family and true hunger, cabbage and turnip. They were not precious nor prized. They did not dazzle with color or perfume the air with sweet aroma. But they were always there waiting in dark soil or tucked in straw, holding on through frost, through famine, through forgetfulness. They were the food of survival, of seasons when the earth slept and people dreamed of warmth. Let us begin with cabbage. To speak of cabbage is to speak of resilience. It is a vegetable that thrives where others fail, holding its shape through wind, rain, and neglect. In the medieval gardens of Europe, cabbage was among the first things planted and the last to disappear from the table. Green, red, Savoy, pearled or smooth, its leaves were wrapped like secrets, dense with promise. The outer leaves might blister in frost, but the heart would remain tender. Families would peel it back slowly, layer by layer, revealing sustenance with every fold. Imagine a kitchen with stone floors and smoke-darkened beams. A pot bubbles gently on the hearth. Within, shreds of cabbage wilt in a broth made from bones, onions, and a handful of barley. A girl stirs it gently, her cheeks pink from the cold, her fingers red from washing root vegetables in icy water. She does not think of cabbage as humble. She thinks of it as home. In times of scarcity, cabbage stretched meals. It filled pies and pasties flavored with scraps of salt pork or flecks of herbs. It was pickled into sauerkraut to last through winter or cooked slowly with caraway and vinegar until it melted into comfort. Monks in cold abbeys praised its healing nature, using it to ease digestion and soothe fevers. It was applied to bruises, bandaged into poultices, even whispered over in blessing. There is something sacred in its ordinariness. A cabbage feeds the body, yes, but it also calms the mind. You do not eat cabbage in haste. You slice it slowly, cook it patiently, eat it while watching the snow fall, the candle flicker. You chew, and it warms you from the inside. And then there is the turnip. Smaller, paler, often overlooked, the turnip has long been the underdog of the root world. But for centuries, it too was a guardian of the winter table. Grown in rough soil needing little care, turnips were often left for last in the field, harvested when all else was gone. Their white and purple skin belied the earthy sharpness within, a taste both bold and grounding. In some places, turnips were roasted with a drizzle of oil. In others, they were mashed with milk and pepper. They filled stews, thickened soups, or were sliced and fried crisp for those lucky enough to own a pan and fat. But always they were there. When potatoes had not yet arrived from the New World, it was turnips that carried the weight. They were a staple of fast days and famine years, of harvest festivals and hunger seasons alike. Picture now an old woman, sitting near the fire, peeling turnips with a small knife. Her hands are gnarled like roots themselves, her eyes soft with memory. The turnips go into a blackened pot with cabbage, thyme, and a single dried sausage. The room smells of survival and love. She hums a tune. She remembers when there was less and when there was more. Turnips, like cabbage, were also used for more than food. In some villages, they were hollowed out and lit with candles to frighten away spirits, a practice that traveled and transformed into Halloween pumpkins centuries later. Children carved faces into them, placed them by windows, believed they watched through the night. Even then, turnips were more than they seemed. They held myth in their flesh. Today, in the modern kitchen, cabbage and turnip are often ignored. They are not the shining stars of glossy cookbooks. But for those who know, they remain essential. Roast a turnip until its edges caramelize, and it will speak to you of fireplaces and wooden tables. Saute cabbage in butter until it wilts, and it will remind you of your grandmother's voice, soft and steady, guiding your hands. There is no rush with these foods. No need for precision or show. They ask only to be remembered. And they remember. In return, in Poland, cabbage becomes bigos, a hunter's stew that simmers for days, growing richer with each passing hour. In Ireland, it becomes colcannon mashed with potatoes and butter, served in heaping mounds. In Korea, it becomes kimchi, fermented with fire and salt and story. In each culture, cabbage adapts, absorbs, transforms. It holds memory like brine. Turnips, too, find their way into tradition. The Scots mash them with butter and call them neeps, served alongside haggis on winter nights. In Japan, turnips are pickled delicately, eaten with rice and tea. In France, they simmer in soups where they surrender to tenderness. They are not glamorous, but they are true. Perhaps that is what draws us back to them, their honesty. In a world of artificial flavors and fleeting trends, cabbage and turnip endure. They do not pretend. They are what they are, and they offer it freely. In gardens they ask little, a patch of earth, a few months. In kitchens they require time, a bit of heat, a bit of care. And in return, they give warmth, strength, sustenance. Picture now a young couple cooking together in a tiny flat, the window open to a cold breeze. On the stove, turnips roast beside wedges of cabbage, their edges browning. They have little money, but they have time. They sit on the floor to eat, bowls in their laps, steam rising. It is not a feast, but it is dinner. And in its simplicity, it holds something sacred. Or imagine an old man in a rural town, tending his small garden behind the shed. He plants turnips in spring, cabbage in summer. He watches the weather. He knows the signs. When the frost comes, he lifts the roots gently. He stores them in straw, proud and quiet. He does not say much. But when his grandchildren visit, he serves them soup. They eat it slowly. They listen. And the story passes on, not in words, but in flavor. Cabbage and turnip are more than food. They are bridges between seasons, between generations, between hardship and comfort. They do not dazzle, but they endure. And endurance, in its quiet way, is a kind of beauty. Some might say these vegetables are too plain, too peasant. But what is peasant food, if not the food of real people? Of hands that work the soil, of lives built on rhythm and ritual, of meals that nourish not only the body, but the soul. These are not relics of the past. They are offerings for the present. You can find cabbage and turnip at any market still. You can grow them in a pot, in a patch of dirt behind your home. They are waiting, not just to be eaten, but to be known. Again, to be treated not as leftovers, but as legacy. And when you slice into a head of cabbage, or peel a turnip with care, you are not just preparing a meal. You are remembering something older than recipes. You are stepping into the quiet continuity of nourishment. The whisper of frost on window panes, the warmth of soup in a wooden bowl, the rhythm of a knife against a board. The moment when you sit, breathe, eat, and in doing so, feel time fold gently around you. So let us not pity these vegetables for their simplicity. Let us praise them for their loyalty. In a world that changes with every season, they remain. And perhaps that is why, when we slice into a turnip or fold cabbage leaves into a steaming stew, we feel something stir, something that speaks not only to hunger, but to memory, to belonging. They do not need celebration. They only need a place. On the table, a pot on the stove, and someone willing to taste what time has preserved. For in their quiet flavor lies a message. What sustains us most is often what we overlook. But if we pause, if we cook slowly, if we eat with care, we may find ourselves nourished in ways we didn't expect. In the hush of a monastery, in the low hum of a poor man's kitchen, and in the worn palms of a widow preparing supper alone, two ingredients have passed from hand to hand for centuries: lentil and onion. They are humble, unassuming, and patient. They do not call attention to themselves, but they wait quietly, always ready to become something more. They belong not to kings, but to keepers. Not to chefs, but to caretakers. In them lives a long history of fasting, healing, and devotion. To speak of lentils is to speak of humility. One of the earliest cultivated legumes, lentils were found in ancient tombs and mentioned in sacred texts. They were not a luxury, but a necessity. Grown in poor soils, harvested by hand, dried in the sun, they were the backbone of many kitchens across Europe and beyond. A bowl of lentils, simple and steaming, has often been the first meal after mourning, the first comfort after illness, the first solid food in times of return. In the peasant homes of France, Italy, and Germany, lentils were the meal of Mondays and petitas, of rain days and long winters. Boiled slowly in clay pots, flavored with herbs or bits of meat when possible. They fed large families with little fuss. Their texture soft but not mushy spoke of quiet strength. Their flavor mild but earthy spoke of grounding. Picture a woman in a stone cottage, her apron damp with steam. She lifts the lid of her pot and stirs gently, releasing the scent of lentils, garlic, and bay leaf into the air. Outside, the sky is gray. Inside, the soup simmers, steady and sure. There is no celebration tonight, but there is food. And food, like love, does not need to be loud. Lentils were also tied to religious practices. During Lent, when meat and excess were set aside, lentils stood in, providing nourishment without indulgence. Monks favored them for their simplicity. Mothers served them to teach thrift. In times of hardship, they were a blessing. In times of plenty, they were not forgotten. That alone says much. And always, beside the lentil or before it or beneath it, there was the onion. The onion is the quiet architect of flavor. Nearly every European dish begins with its gentle surrender to heat. It is the first thing chopped, the first to hit. The pan, the first scent to rise and make a house feel like home. Onions have layers, yes, but more than that, they have memory. They hold the sweat of farmers, the patience of cooks, the tears of generations who have peeled them not only for meals, but for meaning. In medieval cookery, onions were essential. They were one of the few vegetables that stored well through winter, hung in braids in the larder, or laid in baskets under beds. They were boiled, roasted, fried, or eaten raw with coarse bread and salt. They flavored pottage and stew, were baked into tarts, or mixed with vinegar to cure. In the hands of the poor, they became the difference between blandness and nourishment. In the hands of the skilled, they became transformation. Imagine a monk in a silent kitchen, early morning, chopping onions with practiced rhythm. He works alone, the knife a whisper against the board. He adds the slices to a pot, lets them melt into golden sweetness before adding water, lentils, herbs. The scent fills the cloister. Later, the brothers will eat in silence, spooning comfort from bowls. No meat, no wine, but a warmth that seeps into bone. That is the gift of onion and lentil, quiet abundance. In rural kitchens, onions were a cook's ally. Not flashy, not rare, but dependable. A browned onion could deepen a broth. A raw one could spark an appetite. Children might turn away from greens or roots, but onions, caramelized and tucked into bread or spooned over potatoes, were welcome. They were the flavor of growing up, of coming in from the cold, of being cared for. Lentils and onions together are more than ingredients, they are a meal. A lentil soup without onion is incomplete. An onion without a lentil nearby is a prelude unfinished. Together they create something alchemical, a meal that feels ancient, balanced, whole. Across Europe, every region has its version. In Provence, lentils simmer with onion, thyme, and a hint of tomato. In Germany, they are stewed with vinegar and sugar. In Scotland, they appear in broths that brace against cold. In Greece, they are paired with olive oil and garlic, eaten with crusty bread and stories of long ago. There's no right way. Only the memory of hands stirring, only the ritual of simmering. The beauty of these ingredients lies in their adaptability. Lentils absorb what they are given. Onions shape what they surround. They are companions in transformation. They remind us that with time and patience, even the most modest can become deeply nourishing. Picture now a small table, one candle burning. Lo, a young man and an old woman eat from the same pot, sharing spoonfuls of lentils and onion, seasoned with salt, maybe a bit of vinegar. They do not talk much. The food does the speaking. Each bite says, "We are here. We have made it through. And tomorrow there will be more." Or picture a child learning to cook, tears running down her cheeks from the onions. She complains, but the tears don't last. She stirs the pot and the scent shifts. She tastes and she smiles. One day she will cook this for someone she loves. And the onions will weep for her too. Lentils and onions are not fashionable, but they are timeless. They are the core of old cookbooks and the secret of simple chefs. They are what you turn to when you are tired, when your purse is light, when your heart is heavy, and they never fail you. You can grow lentils in dry soil. You can keep onions for months. They ask little, they give much, and in their giving, they offer more than sustenance. They offer stability. They offer peace. Even now, in modern kitchens, you will find them, quietly waiting on shelves, hidden in bins, paired without fanfare, ready for the pot. And when you cook them slowly, with patience, you step into a tradition older than nations, older than clocks. A tradition that says, "Let us sit, let us be still." Now imagine a room not marked by poverty, but by choice. A modern flat where someone, perhaps weary from the noise of the world, has chosen a quieter life. They reach for lentils not out of necessity, but for the comfort of their softness, the way they bloom in broth without asking for praise. They slice onions slowly, not minding the tears, because they know what comes after, the moment the sizzle begins, the aroma that signals something ancient and kind. In this room, the choice is not for glamour, but for grounding. There is no rush, no urgency, just the slow, patient act of feeding a soul. The spoon rises, the flavors settle, and time itself seems to pause. In that pause lives peace. In that moment, the past becomes present, and all who have ever peeled an onion or soaked a handful of lentils are suddenly not so far away. And when the meal is done, when only a bit of soup clings to the bowl and the air still holds the echo of onion and warmth, there comes a moment of stillness. Not silence, but stillness, the kind that settles in the bones, that reminds you of something steady beneath the noise of life. Lentils and onions do not promise extravagance. They do not pretend to be what they are not, but what they offer: consistency, warmth, memory is enough, more than enough. They are not the past. They are the bridge to what endures. And in every pot on every table, in every quiet meal shared or eaten alone, they remain dot in the damp earth of monastery gardens and the narrow furrows of village fields. Two slender stalks have pushed their way toward the sun for centuries quiet, fragrant and full of purpose. Leek and garlic, though modest in stature, have long held power far beyond their weight. They are not simply food. They are tradition, medicine, protection, and memory. Their scent lingers not just in kitchens, but in prayers, in battles, in quiet acts of healing passed down through generations. The leek, with its long white stalk and fan of green, has been cultivated since ancient times. In medieval Europe, it was grown not for glamour, but for endurance. Leeks survived the frost. They emerged early in spring. They grew well in poor soil. Monks favored them for their subtle sweetness, their gentle strength. They appeared in pottages, pies, and broths. They were sliced fine for healing poultices or hung in bunches to dry against winter need. In Wales, the leek took on meaning beyond the plate. It became a national symbol worn in hats during battles, praised in poetry, woven into legend. Soldiers believed it brought clarity, courage, and sharpness in thought. A vegetable that whispers rather than shouts, the leek carries both quiet nourishment and quiet pride. Picture a monk at the edge of a stone-walled garden. He kneels in the damp soil, lifting leeks one by one, brushing earth from their roots. Behind him, bells toll softly. In the kitchen, a novice trims the leeks and adds them to a pot already simmering with barley, wild herbs, and lentils from last season. The scent is gentle, green, and promising. This is a meal of patience, of rhythm, of remembering that even the simplest ingredients can bring depth when given time. Garlic, on the other hand, is bolder. Where leek soothes, garlic awakens. Where leek comforts, garlic fortifies. Garlic's bite is sharp, its scent unmistakable. It is the herald of flavor and the harbinger of healing. In medieval kitchens, garlic was both food and ward. It was mashed into pastes, stirred into sauces, and crushed into wine for medicine. It was hung in thresholds to guard against illness, tucked beneath pillows to ward off spirits, boiled in broths to bring strength back to tired bodies. Farmers planted garlic not only to eat, but to protect their land. In times of plague, its cloves were mashed and smeared onto doors. In times of fear, it was worn around the neck. Garlic was trussed in bulb form. In times of war and worry, garlic meant survival. And yet, for all its fierceness, garlic is not unkind. Roasted slowly, it mellows into sweetness. Stirred gently into soup, it lifts rather than overwhelms. In hands that respect it, garlic is transformation. It takes the humble and makes it noble. Imagine a hearth where leeks sizzle in a clay pan, softened in butter or dripping fat. Then a clove of garlic is added, just one, and the room changes. The scent rises deep and ancient. It fills the beams. It softens the edges of the day. Children stop their chatter. Elders close their eyes. Hunger stirs. Hope stirs with it. Together, leek and garlic form a balance. One is light, the other dark. One is quiet, the other bold. One nestles into soups like a secret. The other announces itself with every breath. Yet in combination, they become something greater than their parts. A pot of leek and garlic soup on a winter night is a declaration. We are cared for. We are protected. We are fed. In France, vichyssoise cool and creamy is made of leeks, potatoes, and gentle seasoning. In Spain, garlic soup sopa. Diallo is bold and bracing, eaten with crusty bread and poached egg. In Italy, aglio e olio turns garlic into a dance partner for pasta. In each, the vegetables speak in their own voice, shaped by place and need. But they never vanish. They remain ever adaptable, and behind them are stories of leeks worn into battle by Welsh archers standing firm against steel, of garlic garlands hung by midwives in homes where babies were born by candlelight, of monks who fed the sick with broth laced with these plants, believing not just in food, but in faith. These are not stories of extravagance, but of care, of repetition, of small gestures done over and over until they became sacred. Picture now a grandmother peeling garlic in a kitchen where light fades early. She hums an old tune, one she does not remember learning. The garlic skins fall like paper snow onto the counter. Next to her, a boy chops leeks, clumsy but eager. The pot warms, the scent rises. It is enough. Or picture a young woman cooking alone in a city far from home. She has little, but she has garlic and leeks. She cooks for herself not out of sadness, but reverence for the act, for the roots, for those who cooked before. She eats slowly, gratefully. She feels grounded again. These foods are bridges between past and present, between scarcity and abundance, between vulnerability and strength. They are never the main event, but without them, the story falters. They teach us to begin with intention, to flavor with care, to honor what is humble. Now picture a quiet morning, dew still clinging to the garden leaves, and a woman with a basket in hand moving slowly between rows. She bends down, parts the soil with care, and pulls up a leek, brushing off the earth. A few feet away, garlic bulbs swell beneath the surface, waiting their turn. These are not mere ingredients to her. They are companions. They remind her of her mother, of her grandmother, of days when the pot boiled not with richness, but with resolve. She does not hurry. She is gathering more than food, she's gathering connection. Later, she will slice the leek thin, crush the garlic softly, and stir both into warm oil until the air glows with scent. Perhaps you add water and barley, or milk and potatoes. It doesn't matter. What matters is the act, the ritual. Return. Imagine to a roadside tavern in the Highlands, wind howling just beyond the door, and a cook ladling soup into earthen bowls. The broth is pale but fragrant leeks softened to silk, garlic dancing gently beneath. Travelers huddle near. The hearth, cloak steaming from the storm. The soup is simple, but it revives them. One sip and shoulders relax. Another, and laughter begins to return. In that moment, garlic and leek are not just food, they are shelter. They are hospitality in its truest form, something warm offered with nothing expected in return. And as bowls are emptied and hands warmed, no one remembers the simplicity. They remember the comfort. And what of the quiet dinners? The ones with no guests, no ceremony, no occasion? When a person cooks not to impress, but to soothe. When the pot simmers gently, not for applause, but for peace. In those moments, leek and garlic are faithful friends. They ask for little. A rinse, a peel, a slow heat. And in return, they offer something deeper than flavor. They offer rhythm, reassurance, the feeling that even in solitude, even in silence, we are part of something ongoing, something older than us. And kinder too. And perhaps that is why, even in our modern world of packaged meals and glittering menus, we still return to them. Leek and garlic, these old companions, remind us of what truly matters. That food is not about performance. It is about presence. It is about time taken, hands moved with care, mouths fed with kindness. In every clove pressed and every stalk sliced, we are offered not just sustenance, but remembrance. We are reminded that somewhere, long ago, someone did this too, stood at a stove, stirred a pot, tasted, adjusted, and gave what they had with love. That is enough. And it is everything. In the cold breath of early November, when the fields have given all they could and the sky turns to pewter, two vegetables remain stubborn, quiet, and waiting. Cabbage and turnip. Not glamorous, not rare, but in their own way, more noble than any feast. They are the survivors, the keepers of winter, the steady companions of those who endure. Cabbage, with its tightly wrapped leaves, feels almost like a secret, curled in on itself, dense and cool to the touch. It waits patiently for its moment. It doesn't wilt easily. It doesn't fade with frost. It holds on. You can hang it in a cellar for weeks, even months. Slice into it, and it's still crisp, still willing to give. It smells of earth and wind, of roots and resilience. For medieval families, cabbage was not just food, it was a promise. A green thing, alive when all else had withered. Cabbage was what you salted and kept, what you boiled and shared, what you reached for when the cupboards had grown quiet. Picture a stone cottage half buried in snow. Inside, the fire is small, but the pot is warm. A woman, her hands red from cold, slices cabbage slowly, the knife tapping rhythm against wood. Her children sit by the hearth, hungry but calm. Into the pot go onions, maybe a bit of lard, perhaps barley from the last harvest. Then cabbage, chopped thick. The smell is sharp at first, then sweet, then deep. It fills the room, drives back the frost. It says, "This will be enough." Not plenty, but enough. In every culture across Europe, cabbage found its way into meals of comfort and endurance. In Poland, it became bigos, a hunter's stew of meat and fermented cabbage. In Germany, Sauerkraut turned humble leaves into something sour, alive, and lasting. In Russia, cabbage soup was as constant as the seasons. Boiled or baked, shredded or whole, cabbage was the common ground of winter cooking. It asked for little, but gave much. Its taste deepened with time. Its spirit was generous, and, beside the cabbage, in the basket of root vegetables kept in straw, there was always the turnip. Round, firm, pale as bone, or purple like bruised dusk, the turnip was not beloved, but it was relied upon. Turnips grew where little else would. They fattened in poor soil. They matured in cold. They were, in essence, defiance made edible. When harvests failed or coins ran dry, turnips were still there. You could boil them, roast them, mash them with salt and milk. You could feed them to beasts or bake them into pies. They were the quiet backbone of lean times, not celebrated, but never absent. A dish of cabbage and turnip was not about flavor, it was about fortitude. It was what you ate when the world narrowed, when the wind howled at your door, when the days were short, and the nights long. It was food that reminded you not of what you lacked, but of what you could still hold on to. And that mattered. Imagine a monastery at dusk. The brothers move silently through the cloisters, their sandals whispering over cold stone. In the kitchen, a novice stirs a pot. In it float cabbage leaves, soft and pale. Chunks of turnip sink and rise with the bubbles. A bit of garlic, a hint of salt, nothing more. The broth is thin, but the smell is kind. It wraps itself around the weary and the waiting. When the bell rings and bowls are filled, no one speaks. But in every spoonful, there is warmth, there is history, there is quiet grace. Turnips, like cabbage, found their way into tradition. In parts of Scotland, they became part of hogmanay mashed with butter, eaten with oats. In the Alps, they were pickled for endurance. In Ireland, they were carved into lanterns before pumpkins ever came across the sea. They lived not just in kitchens, but in stories, in rituals, in small acts of care. And there is something beautiful in that, in how these vegetables, often mocked or overlooked, became symbols of survival, in how they stood in the place of meat when there was none, in the place of spice when trade failed, in the place of abundance, when only need remained. They asked for patience, for long cooking, for slow hands. They rewarded effort, not haste. And in doing so, they reminded those who ate them that not all things of value are quick, or pretty, or prized. Some things are simply present, steadily, faithfully, without demand. That is their power. Picture a young boy in a farmhouse kitchen, watching his grandmother peel turnips by the glow of an oil lamp. He wrinkles his nose at the smell. She smiles, says nothing. Later, when the mash is on the plate, butter pooling in the middle, he eats in silence. It is warm, it is filling, it stays with him. Years later, in a city far away, he will buy turnips and cabbage without thinking. And when he cooks them, he will feel something settle in his chest, a memory, a return. Or imagine a mother, alone, with her thoughts, cooking cabbage and turnip not because she must, but because she wants to feel steady again. She chops slowly, the knife's rhythm calms her. The scent rising from the pot is old, familiar. As the soup simmers, so does she. And when she eats alone, she does not feel lonely. She feels rooted. These are foods that do not seek praise. They are not for celebration, but for continuity. They speak not of feasts, but of the days between. Of the stretch of January where hope flickers. Of the quiet Tuesdays when the pantry looks bare. They are for those moments, and those moments are many. And yet, in their simplicity, they carry great weight. A cabbage in a cellar is a kind of wealth. A turnip in a stew is a kind of prayer. A shared pot of both is a kind of peace, even now. When shelves shine with imports and markets groan with options, cabbage and turnip remain. They are not trendy, but they are true. In kitchens that prize economy, in households that understand the value of old ways. They are still there, simmering, softening, strengthening. Let us not forget them. Let us not rush past them for brighter things. Let us instead honor the slow meal, the simmering broth, the humble root, the green leaf. Let us honor the hands that grew them, the hands that cooked them, the hands that served them without fanfare. For in those hands is the story of winter, of hunger met with patience, of cold met with fire, of simplicity met with reverence. That is the story cabbage and turnip tell. And if we listen, truly listen, we may find in them not only nourishment, but wisdom. A wisdom that says, you need not shine to be worthy. You need only to endure, to offer what you can, to feed what is near. And in doing so, you become part of something long and quiet and strong. There was a place in every home, no matter how grand or humble, where warmth gathered, stories thickened in the air, and meals began without recipe. That place was the hearth. It was more than fire. It was memory held in stone, breath rising with steam, the pulse of life when all else grew cold. In medieval Europe, the hearth was the heart, unmoving, unyielding, but alive in its own quiet way. Smoke curled from its chimney like a thread linking earth to sky. Ashes glowed beneath iron pots. And around it, people gathered, not always to speak, often just to be. The hearth was steady when life was not. It was the first place lit in the morning and the last to sleep at night. And in that hearth, resting heavy on iron tripods or hanging from soot-darkened hooks, there was almost always a pot, a large one, the communal pot. It was never truly empty, never truly new. It carried the flavor of the day before and the day before that. Not by accident, but by intent, the pot remembered. It remembered beans boiled soft and onions turned sweet. It remembered bones cracked for marrow, herbs bruised into broth. It remembered hardship and celebration, hunger and sharing. In some villages, that pot rarely left the flame. It simmered gently for hours, even days. A perpetual meal. Add to it what you could. A scrap of meat, a handful of barley, yesterday's bread. Take from it what you needed. A ladle, a sip, a supper. The rules were simple. Feed the pot and the pot feeds you. And through that unspoken promise, the hearth became more than a stove. It became sanctuary. It was where you dried your boots, warmed your fingers, nursed your sick. It was where children dozed on the floor, heads in grandmother's lap, the hum of the pot like a lullaby. It was where travelers were welcomed, strangers offered broth without question. To refuse a seat by the hearth was to refuse kinship. To stir the pot was to join a lineage older than names. And so meals became more than nourishment, they became stories. Not written down, but repeated with each stir of the ladle. This carrot came from old Marta's garden. The last of the salt pork, remember when we butchered in autumn? Bay leaves for luck, like mother used. The pot listened. It thickened with history. And each mouthful, even when thin, carried something deep. The hearth was teacher. It taught patience. The fire must be tended, not rushed. It taught resourcefulness. A little well cooked goes a long way. It taught reverence. For food, for fire, for company. Picture a winter night in a snowbound cottage. The wind hammers the shutters. The roof groans. Inside, the hearth glows orange. In the pot, a soup bubbles slowly. There is not much in it, some lentils, a turnip, wild herbs, but it smells like kindness. Around it, a family sits close. They speak in murmurs. A father ladles soup into bowls. A mother offers bread. A child cradles her bowl with both hands. The world outside is cruel. But here, in this warmth, there is peace. There is enough. And imagine further, a village square, dusk falling. The baker's fire is out, the smith's tools cooling. But from a wide pot over shared flame, Supper is served to those without kitchens, without homes. This is no charity. This is tradition. The pot belongs to no one and to all. In times of famine, it holds hope. In times of plague, comfort. In times of feast, joy. A pot this old holds memory deeper than any scroll. It holds the taste of generosity. In some households, broth from this pot was considered medicinal, a remedy for weakness, a balm for sorrow. Recipes were rarely written, but always remembered. A sprig of thyme for courage, a clove of garlic for strength, a dash of vinegar to waken the spirit. These were not exact. They were instinctual, passed from hand to hand like sacred flame. And always, the fire was never allowed to die. Embers were banked carefully, coaxed back at dawn. If the fire died, something more than heat was lost, something ancestral, something holy. Even in the grand halls of castles, where feasts dazzled and wines flowed, the kitchen still clung to this ritual. Somewhere, a large pot always simmered, not for the lords, but for the servants, the workers, the pages. A simple soup, often better than the banquet. Because it was real, because it was shared, because it fed not ego, but body. The hearth, even hidden, held power, and in monasteries the same. Beneath vaulted ceilings and behind stone cloisters, brothers cooked in silence. Their hearths were wide, their pots deep. The rules of simplicity governed them. But simplicity, when done with care, becomes sacred. Onion, cabbage, a single root, stirred slowly. Prayed over, not in words, but in rhythm. In the way the spoon moved, in the way the heat built. In the way hunger faded not with fullness, but with presence. The hearth is where presence lives. In a world full of distraction, it offers focus. The fire needs watching. The pot needs stirring. The meal needs tasting. And in that attentiveness, life slows. Breath deepens. We remember ourselves not as consumers, but as creators. Not as owners, but as stewards. The hearth teaches that we are part of a cycle of warmth given and received, of effort returned, of care passed on. Even beyond the home, the idea of the hearth lingered. In town halls and guild kitchens, in abbey refectories and peasant cottages, the hearth was more than a location, it was a spirit. It traveled with migrants who carried only memories, with pilgrims walking for days. Wherever they settled, they built the fire first. Even the smallest campfire was a hearth if others sat beside it. If hands stretched toward it in silence, if pots were hung above it, if stories were told beside it in hushed tones. That was enough. That was everything. The hearth gathered. It did not discriminate. Rich and poor, young and old, all became shadows in its flickering light. There were times when the fire dimmed through war, through sickness, through sorrow. But it always came back. Someone always struck the flint again. Someone always banked the embers. Someone always stirred the pot, even if there was little to stir. And in that act small, stubborn, and sacred life began again. Because fire is hope. Because soup is solace. Because warmth shared is warmth doubled. And food, even the most modest broth, is a declaration. I am here. You are not alone. And maybe, just maybe, this is why we continue to light candles at dinner tables, or sit near ovens as something bakes, or leave soups to simmer when we are unsure what else to do. We are not simply following habits. We are reaching toward memory, toward the hearth that lived at the center of every story before ours, the one that welcomed the weary, forgave the forgotten, and held the fragile rhythms of ordinary life. It is still there. In every quiet corner, in every pot stirred without. Hurry, in every gesture of warmth offered without words. The hearth remains not always seen, but always felt. And in remembering it, we remember who we are. There was a time when bread was more than food. It was a miracle, a quiet, daily one. Born of grain, water, fire, and patience. In the medieval world, bread was life, literal and spiritual. It sat at the center of every table, rich or poor, feast or famine. It was the first thing you reached for and the last thing you gave thanks for. It was not just nourishment. It was memory, ritual, work, and faith, all kneaded into something that cracked when torn and softened in the hand. And before the bread, there was the grain. It grew in long waves across the fields, rustling with the breath of wind. Barley, rye, oats, and wheat, each grain a seed of possibility. To grow it was to wait. To reap it was to pray. To grind it was to labor. No part of this was rushed. No part of it could be skipped. Each stage of the bread's journey, planting, growing, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, grinding, mixing, kneading, baking was sacred. A chain of care. A devotion. In the countryside, the baking of bread was a weekly rhythm. Women rose before the sun. In dim kitchens, they worked with instinct passed down in quiet rooms. The dough was made not by recipe, but by feel. A little more water, a handful more flour. Knead until your hands tell you it's ready. The oven, a great stone mouth blackened by time, was fired slowly, then filled with loaves that cracked and rose with the heat. The smell drifted into lanes and windows. It said, "We are alive." In villages, the communal oven was a place of meeting. You brought your dough wrapped in cloth, waited your turn, and traded stories. The baker was a keeper of time. The loaf he gave you was the day transformed, sun, earth, toil, and breath now resting in your hands. You carried it home gently, like a child. Not all bread was equal. White bread was for the wealthy, made from fine wheat, sifted and clean. Brown bread, darker and rougher, was for the laborer. Oat bread in the north, rye in the colder lands. In lean years, bread was stretched with chestnut flour or mashed beans. Sometimes even ground bark. These were not degradations, they were adaptations. Proof that the will to eat was stronger than the shame of scarcity. And still, even the humblest loaf was honored. It was never wasted. If a piece fell, it was kissed or touched to the forehead. Leftover crusts were dried, ground again, reused. Bread was never just bread. It was a gift. In monasteries, monks broke their silence with bread. In churches, the holiest rituals centered around it. In homes, it was given before all else. Even the poorest offered a piece to guests before meat or milk. To share bread was to say, "I welcome you. I trust you. I honor your hunger." Picture a family huddled in a stone cottage. The wind claws at the door. Supper is a pot of thin broth, but beside it sits a loaf dense, slightly sour, baked 3 days ago. It is sliced slowly, each piece passed with care. There is not much, but no one goes without. This act simple, every day, is the anchor of survival. And more than that, the anchor of grace. Bread did not need seasoning. It did not need explanation. It simply was, and that was enough. In cities, bread was political. Prices were watched closely. A rise could cause riots. A shortage could topple a ruler, because bread was not luxury. It was right. It was justice. A fair loaf meant peace. An absent loaf meant unrest. Bakers were regulated. Guilds enforced quality. In some places, loaves were marked with symbols so you knew who had made them, who to praise, who to blame. In others, women baked in their homes, selling crusts and crumbs from baskets lined with linen. A warm loaf could buy silence or loyalty or love. And yet, even among all this attention, bread kept its humility. It never shouted. It never demanded. It waited. Quietly, on tables, in bags, in the pockets of travelers, in the hands of workers, in the arms of beggars. It absorbed soups, carried cheese, caught oil, softened grief. You see it in paintings on altars, in markets, beside saints and sinners. Always bread. always present. And in stories too. A boy with only a crust gives it to an old woman and is rewarded with gold. A girl drops her last piece for birds and is led to safety. Bread is the test. Bread is the reward. Even the act of kneading was full of meaning. Push, fold, stretch, repeat. A rhythm of care, of time. Hands pressed into dough with the memory of those before. You kneaded not just for the loaf, but for the day, for the warmth it would give, for the bellies it would quiet, for the peace it would bring. Bread was home. Bread was the future. And when famine struck, the absence of bread was more than hunger. It was loss. Loss of comfort. Loss of ritual. Loss of belief. People dreamed of bread, described it in longing. And when it returned, it was wept over. Imagine a cloister garden. Wheat grows tall and gold in the sun. A brother harvests quietly, tying bundles with twine. In the bakehouse, another grinds grain with stone. Another stirs the dough, adding only water and salt. And later, the loaves come from the oven dark and fragrant. In the dining hall, they are shared in silence. The bread is passed, not spoken of, but all who eat it feel it. They feel the cycle, the gift, the labor, the mercy. Or think of a widow in her cottage. She bakes not for a feast, but to remember. She kneads with slow hands, stares into the coals as it rises. When it's done, she cuts a piece, eats it with honey, and closes her eyes. It tastes like what once was. It tastes like stillness, like return, like love. There is no story older than bread. No hunger deeper, no symbol more complete. Bread is body, breath, and bond. It is patience made visible. It is soil transformed. It is a mother's hands, a monk's prayer, a child's comfort, a stranger's gift. It does not ask much, only time, only attention. And in return, it gives enough. It gives warmth. It gives quiet. It gives something to hold. Even now, in a world of noise and speed, the bread still rises, still waits, still welcomes. We break it without thinking, but perhaps we should pause. Perhaps we should feel again what it means to take, to chew, to be fed, to be sustained not just in body, but in memory, in meaning, in quiet thanks. Perhaps that is why, across centuries and continents, bread remains a gesture of peace. A loaf broken between enemies can end a quarrel. A crust offered to a stranger can begin a friendship. Bread does not argue, it invites. In times of crisis, it is what people line up for, not jewels, not luxury, but flour, water, yeast. The ingredients are simple, yet the meaning profound. And even today, in kitchens lit by modern lights and ovens that hum instead of crackle, the act of baking bread brings stillness. Hands covered in flour, hearts steadying with every fold, every rise. The smell of baking is the smell of coming home. It is the memory of grandmothers, of village ovens, of sacred rituals and whispered prayers. Bread continues to speak in silence. It tells us that life is hard, but it can be softened. That effort matters. That small things, grains, crumbs, warmth can hold vast meaning. That when we share what we have, even a little, the world becomes more bearable. That hunger, in all its forms, can be met not with grandeur, but with care. Bread teaches us to be human. And in its quiet presence, in its golden crust and soft center, we are reminded, what is ordinary is also holy. Time in the medieval world did not tick. It did not flash or buzz or count down. It breathed. It flowed like a stream beside a field. Slow and steady, rippling with rhythm. It did not chase. It invited. For the people of that age, time was not a thing to measure. It was a thing to feel. It moved in circles, not lines. It followed the sun, the moon, the stars. It bowed to the seasons, to the growing of crops, to the warmth of the earth, and the cold of the wind. The day began not with alarms but with birdsong, with mist curling over thatched roofs, with dew on grass and the lowing of cows. The morning was not rushed. It was entered gently, like a room you respected. You listened, you stirred the embers. You gave thanks, and then you moved. There were no wristwatches or digital clocks, but there was the bell. It rang from towers and abbeys, from village chapels and distant monasteries. The bell was the voice of time. It told you when to rise, when to work, when to pray, when to rest. Its tone changed with the hour soft at dawn, bright at midday, deep and solemn in the evening. Monks kept the hours, a sacred pattern of prayer. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. These were not just spiritual appointments, they were the framework of the day. Even lay people, though not obliged, moved in tandem with them. Work would pause as the bell called out, heads bowed. Fields were quiet, and then the rhythm resumed. The seasons too were keepers of time. Spring was for planting hope in every seed. Summer was for tending, watching, watering, praying. Autumn was for harvesting, gathering with joy or with worry. Winter was for stillness, waiting, repairing, enduring. These were not optional rhythms, they were truth. A calendar woven into the land, not paper. Even feast days and saints. Days served as temporal anchors. You knew the time of year by them. It's near St. Martin's Day, someone might say. The geese are getting fat. Or, Candlemas has passed, so the worst of winter is done. Time was not abstract. It was tasted in stews, seen in the orchard, felt in the bones. It moved slowly enough to be noticed, and that slowness was its gift out in towns. The marketplace hummed with its own sense of time. Dawn was for bakers and butchers, mid-morning for sellers and buyers, afternoon for gossip and trade. When the sun dipped, stalls closed, shutters drawn, lanterns lit. No one needed a clock to know. The shadows spoke. The air changed. People felt. Time in their skin. Children grew not by years but by seasons. She was born just after the barley was brought in. He's nearly 5 winters old. Old age was counted not in decades, but in what had been endured. The hard winters, the lean harvests, the births, the losses. You aged with the land. Even indoors, time had a softness to it. Light moved across wooden floors. Fire rose and fell. Shadows lengthened. Candles were burned not to track time but to soften it. A single taper, burning low, told you it was evening. Time was quiet company. It did not demand, only accompanied. People paused more. Not out of laziness, but because there was space to do so. You paused when you passed a chapel. You paused before bread. You paused when the wind rose. Silence was not feared. It was part of the rhythm. Consider the monk in his cell. He has no clock, but he knows the light, knows the hour by its color on the stone. He listens for the bell, and when it rings, he goes not rushed, not reluctant, but ready. His day is carved into sections not for efficiency, but for peace. The structure gives him freedom, not burden. He does not squeeze tasks into every moment. He lets the moment shape the task. His prayer is not forced. It flows with the breath of time. Or picture a farmer. He wakes when the sky begins to pale. He moves with the animals, not against them. He plows when the soil gives way, not when the schedule insists. He eats when the work is done. He sits when his legs grow heavy. Time is felt, not fought. In winter, nights are long. Time stretches. People gather by firelight, and the hours pass in stories, in songs, in quiet. You do not kill time, you tend it, like coals, letting it burn low and warm. You respect it, because you do not have too much of it. You do not assume there will always be more. Each moment has value, not in productivity, but in presence. To be here now, with hands warmed by fire and belly warmed by soup, is enough. More than enough. Even in sorrow, time time moved gently. Mourners were black for months, sometimes years. Grief was not hurried. It was walked through, day by day. The bell tolled slowly at funerals. Steps matched its sound. Time made space for loss, for remembering, for healing. And in joy, too, time expanded. Feast days lasted not hours, but days. Weddings stretched from dawn into star-filled night. There was no need to hurry happiness. It was allowed to linger. Time was a vessel, not a race. And in the countryside, among those who could not read, time was told by the world itself. The roosters crow, the flowers bloom, the shortening of the days, the frost on the window, the stars appearing earlier. A shepherd looked up and knew when to bring the flock in. A mother smelled the earth and knew when to plant. No device, no alarm, just deep, inherited knowing. Passed not through instruction, but through life, through repetition. Through memory. In cathedrals, elaborate clocks were built, not to regulate life, but to celebrate it. They rang bells, moved figures, marked the celestial rhythms of sun and moon. They were less tools, more poems. Time was not owned. It was honored. It belonged to God and to the earth, and to all who lived within its circle. Even sin and redemption were woven into time. You confessed not just your guilt, but the time since your last. You repented in seasons. You fasted through Lent. You were forgiven in Easter. Time was spiritual. It was a language between heaven and earth. Perhaps this is what we have forgotten. That time is not an enemy. It is not a scarcity. It is not a thing to hoard or dominate. It is a companion, a rhythm, a teacher. One that says, slow down, look, listen, feel, let the light change, let the day unfold, let the silence speak. In the medieval world, this was understood not because people were simple, but because they were attentive, because they did not have the noise we have now. Their world was not quiet, but it was patient. And in that patience, time blossomed. Let us imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to live again by that older rhythm. To wake not to a screen, but to the slow bloom of light. To move not by the hour, but by the needs of the body and the whisper of the day. To let meals come when hunger calls. To rest when the sun lowers. To speak only when there is something worth saying. In such a world, time becomes spacious. You are not behind. You are not late. You are simply here. Part of the unfolding. There's nothing to catch up to, nothing to chase. Only this moment, and the next each one. Shaped not by urgency, but by presence. This is not nostalgia for a past without hardship. The medieval world was full of pain and toil. But within that hardship, there was also slowness, and that slowness made room for depth, for connection, for meaning. Perhaps what we seek now is not their tools or customs, but their relationship to time. A relationship built on trust, on patience, on acceptance. A recognition that time is not a tyrant, but a companion. Not an enemy, but a friend. So let us remember that rhythm. Not to copy it exactly, but to learn from it, to rise with care, to pause with purpose, to mark moments not with minutes, but with meaning, to let bells ring in our minds, calling us back not to schedules, but to presence. Time does not need to be managed. It needs to be met, greeted, held. It is not slipping away. It is waiting for us to notice. There's a quietness at the end. Of all things, not a silence of absence, but of arrival, of rest. After the stories have been told, after the candles have burned low and the last spoon has scraped the bottom of the bowl, there is this stillness. In the medieval world, such endings were sacred. The close of the day, the close of a season, even the close of a life, all were acknowledged not with noise, but with gentleness. And so it is here, as we come to the close of this quiet journey through time, that we find not emptiness, but fullness. Fullness in the hush, fullness in the breath, fullness in the knowing that nothing more must be done, that you are allowed finally to let go. Perhaps this is what boring history can offer. Not just facts and dates and kings and battles, but stillness, space, a reminder that the past is not behind us. It is around us, in every quiet moment, in every act of care, in every time we choose presence over productivity. The medieval world may seem distant, but its heart still beats in ours. Every time we slow down, every time we listen, every time we love. And so, as the last words fade and the night settles fully, let your mind drift. Let your body rest. Let the story become a dream. You are home now, in the quiet, in the peace, in the deep, slow breath of history. Sleep well. Let your imagination drift once more. Think of the way the villagers gathered in late autumn, not for spectacle, but for harvest thanks. There would be music, yes, but soft the fiddle and the flute, not loud horns or bursting drums. Laughter would rise with the smell of roasted roots and cider, the kind that warms the hands and the heart. Children would sleep beside the fire while stories were passed from elder to elder, like torches lit across generations. No one looked at a clock. No one cared what came next. What mattered was now, the warmth, the nearness, the shared breath. These were the true riches of the time, riches not stored in vaults, but in memory. Now imagine the quiet of a scriptorium. A monk dipping his quill into ink made from oak galls. The parchment stretches gently under his palm as he traces each letter with reverence. He is not hurried. This is not data entry. This is prayer in motion. Each word is given weight, dignity. Each page becomes a record not just of thought, but of time spent in stillness. In our world, we type and send in seconds. But there, every mark was a meditation. Every hour was holy because it was given wholly. And outside, life was just as patient. A shepherd would move slowly with his flock, watching the sky for signs of rain, listening for the cry of lambs. A baker would rise before the sun, letting dough rise in darkness before it met the flame. A carpenter would smooth wood with quiet hands, knowing the grain by touch alone. They did not multitask. They did not divide attention. Each act had its time. And in that, there was peace. Can we learn from this? Perhaps not in every detail, but in spirit. We may not shear sheep or write by candlelight, but we too can honor the moment we are in. We can make tea slowly. We can write a note by hand. We can walk without a destination. We can greet the dawn not with an alarm, but with silence. These are not acts of rebellion, but of remembrance, of reclaiming the rhythm that once sustained whole generations. So as this story draws to its natural end, let it not vanish like mist, but settle like snow, quiet, soft, lasting. Let it remind you that even in the busiest world, you can carry stillness. You can breathe slowly. You can choose rest. Sleep now, not because you are tired of the day, but because you are full of it. Let the hush of the past cradle you. Let the echoes of bells long gone lull you. Let the softness of history soothe. You are not alone in the dark. You are accompanied by time, by memory, by the deep, slow breath of centuries. Sleep well. You are home. There is, even now, a kind of memory written into your very breath, though the world around you may pulse with digital light and restless speed. Something ancient in you still remembers. It remembers the hush of early mornings before the sky turns blue. It remembers the crackling sound of fire and the murmur of stories told in low voices while the night lingers outside. It remembers the value of one slow minute spent doing nothing at all save for being alive. These memories are not gone. They are buried beneath the noise. And this story has been a way of brushing the dust off them, one gentle sentence at a time. Do you feel it now? That soft pull toward rest, not because you're exhausted, but because you've been invited. Invited to stop striving. Invited to simply be. There is no rush. There is no task to finish. no goal to achieve. You are no longer a machine measuring value in output. You are a person, a soul. And like all souls, you deserve a place to rest. So let this story become your blanket. Let it wrap around your shoulders and quiet your worries. Let the rhythm of its words rock you gently, the way a lullaby rocks a child. Let it carry you not just to sleep, but to peace. You've walked the cobbled paths of medieval villages tonight. You've stood beneath the bell towers. You've breathed in the scent of old parchment and heard the scrape of quill on page. And now, the final page turns. The candle burns low. The bell tolls once, not to call you away, but to say, you may rest now. Perhaps tomorrow the world will demand more of you. It may shout and flash and pile up expectations. But tonight, you've stepped outside of that. You've chosen slowness. You've chosen story. You've chosen silence. And in doing so, you've remembered something that many forget, that stillness is not weakness. It is strength. It is wisdom. It is the oldest kind of medicine. You are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be. Here, at the end of the story, with nothing more to carry. Just your breath. Just the soft darkness. Just the gentle weight of sleep beginning to settle into your bones. You have done enough. You are enough. So sleep now, beloved listener. Let the tale dissolve like mist at dawn. Let the echoes of the medieval world fade softly into dreams. You are not alone. You are part of a great and quiet lineage of those who cherish peace, who honor rest, who listen deeply. May this night bring you comfort. May your dreams be kind. And when you wake, may you carry a little of this stillness with you. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. Sleep with history humming low and loving in your heart. Let your final thoughts wander. Gently, not toward problems or plans, but toward softness. Think of a river, slow and silent beneath the moon. Think of a mother's voice humming as she kneads dough in the early hours, her song rising with the steam. Think of pages bound in leather, worn at the edges from countless hands turning them slowly, carefully, reverently. These are the kinds of images the medieval world leaves with us. Not declarations or revolutions, but simple acts of care made meaningful by their patience. And maybe that's the secret, that a good life is not built on grand gestures, but on 100 quiet moments stitched together with kindness. A candle lit each evening, a word spoken gently, a silence honored instead of filled. These were the things people remembered, not because they were exciting, but because they were real. And realness, when paired with rest, becomes a kind of healing, the kind that lingers long after the story is done. So if your eyes grow heavy now, let them close without resistance. You've earned this rest, not just because of what you've done, but because of who you are, a person seeking calm, a soul open to listening, a heart willing to slow down. That is more than enough. Let the rhythm of these final lines soothe you. Let the memory of all you've heard drift like a soft fog through your dreams. You have walked through centuries tonight. You have visited stone chapels and silent hills, kitchens and cloisters, fields and firelit rooms. And now it is time to return, not to hurry, but to rest. To carry a piece of this stillness with you, tucked gently beneath your breath, ready to return to whenever the world feels too loud again. Because rest is not a weakness. It is where strength begins. And tonight, you are wrapped in it, fully and quietly. Sleep well.